So all over the headlines recently, companies are talking about pulling back their AI token spend in order to cut costs. And a lot of people are worried about the implications that might have on different software that they might be using, or different tools that they have in production, or even workflows they're using to actually automate part of their process. And so I think we are moving away from this kind of world of unlimited tokens, unlimited access to AI. But I think one thing that really kind of calls it out is in Hungary's Recruiting Brain Food, he talks about this token anxiety and why it's actually geared towards why people should be using more open source AI rather than kind of sitting within one ecosystem. And reading that gave me an idea for a little deep dive and experiment that I want to run today, where we're actually going to look at how some of the current models will perform when used for a pretty basic recruiting task, which is scoring a resume against a job description. And so you might be surprised at some of the results that we get from this, but hopefully you'll kind of stick around. Let me know if you don't agree with the scores that I made. And then actually this is going to lead into hopefully a pretty exciting announcement that I'm going to make later on in the video. So please stick around for that. All right, so let's dig into it. I'll walk you through how I set up the experiment. And essentially what I did was download my LinkedIn profile, uploaded it here as my resume. So this is just my generic LinkedIn, not customized to any kind of job posting or anything like that. So not really great practice, but something that is kind of a baseline to test against. And then I pulled a job description. This is from Jeremy Lyons, does a RecOps Collective newsletter each week. In it, he has a whole bunch of really good guides. But one of the things he does is provide current job postings that might be relevant for people in recruiting operations. So this is a talent enablement role, somewhat similar to a role that I've done in the past. So I thought it would be interesting to score my current profile against that one and just see what the different models would say if they were acting as a sourcer and trying to match my profile against this role. I took 7 different LLMs from Anthropic, from OpenAI, and from Google, and used them to score my resume against this job description. As part of that process, we calculated the cost of doing that resume scoring, and then looked at the cost of scoring a whole pipeline of potentially 50,000 candidates. We also looked at the speed, so how quickly are we going to get the response back from the model to get that score. And then again, looking at if we were to run this model against a pipeline of 50,000 with kind of 25 models running in parallel, how quickly would we actually process those people? And so it's kind of an interesting analogy of how could we actually potentially use these models to manage an inbound pipeline of candidates, assuming that we let the candidates know that we're doing this in order to actually filter through more effectively rather than just using keyword-based matching or GPA scores or anything like that. So before we actually dig into the results, the thing that I think is quite interesting is looking at the spread of the scores here. So we have scores from, Opus was probably about in the middle at 68, which is a moderate match. Then we had the other 2 Claude models scoring vastly different and giving a weak match score. OpenAI and Flash Lite both giving a strong match. And so you can see that the range of scores for this one use case with one job description, one resume, and one prompt that is going to be the same for all of the models can score between 35 and 88, which I think just shows that these models haven't got it figured out, but hopefully by digging into the experiment we can figure out which ones we may want to use if we were going to do this in production. Okay, so let's dig in. Claude Opus 4.8 is the first one. We've asked it to give a number of things back. So we're going to give a match score, a summary, a scoring rubric, so against all the things that we might care about if we're scoring this against a role internally, some feedback and some gaps. And I think one thing to focus on, we're going to focus on for each of these models, is how distributed the dimensions of the scoring rubric are, because I think that's one of the kind of key things we want from a quantitative measurement for fit against a role, and then whether it actually identifies all the gaps that are in my current resume against what's required in the job description. Because the first stage of the recruitment funnel is actually to disqualify as many people as possible so that you can apply more thoughtful one-on-one interactions with the people as you move down the funnel. But if you don't filter out the people at the top of the funnel, you won't actually get to that process. So I think if we're looking across this, I think the scoring rubric is fair. Misses some keywords that were explicit in the job description but not explicit in my profile. I think experience is good, measurable impact is good. Role title and dominance, the most of the stuff I've done is not necessarily matching one-to-one with the role, even though that if you go a little bit deeper, the experience is a good fit. And the education fit is, somewhat okay, but I'm missing some of the kind of key criteria. And then resume clarity and ATS friendliness. This is a good one for something I'm going to announce in a little bit, but just as a kind of additional helper there. So feedback is generally good. We're not going to go through all of these. But gaps, it does call out all of the kind of key requirements that I don't have. And I think this is really important because when we look at all the different models, Opus is the only one that actually called out all the gaps explicitly. And so is the one that, as a moderate fit, depending on the volume of applications, may then go to a human reviewer to figure out, is this person actually qualified for this role, or should we disposition them? So I think that scores pretty highly overall in terms of the quality of the feedback. When we look at the cost, it's pretty expensive. So these are 8 cents per resume. Across 50,000 resumes, we're looking at $4,000. So you're clearing a pipeline, it's $4,000 worth of token spend. So you're adding this to your cost per hire really is a way to just kind of filter the top of funnel. And so when you're thinking about cost per hire, might be $15,000 for a typical role. You're then increasing that from 15 to 19,000, but you're probably cutting down some of the hours that are required top of funnel for a recruiter or a sourcer to actually read through these resumes manually. So assuming this works as planned, that may or may not be a good trade-off, but it's still quite expensive compared to the others. And it takes about 12 hours to run through all 50,000 if we were to run this in parallel with 25 models actually constantly assessing. So this could be something you leave running overnight if you have software that's able to do this for you, but it's kind of relatively slow, relatively expensive, but high quality. And for that reason, I think I'm going to put Opus 4.8 as an A. So in practice, this is something that I would be quite happy to use in production. It would probably be for roles that are not high volume necessarily, where we actually do want to go into a little bit of depth. Maybe people have more kind of complex backgrounds, and it's going to be really helpful to kind of understand, even if they don't word something exactly like what we're asking for in the job description, we can still actually, through semantics, get a better match. Opus 4.8, I think it is the clear A. Downsides are the speed and the cost. But we'll move on. Sonnet 4.6, and immediately you can see that the rubric is much harsher than what we saw in Opus. And for that reason, we have a much weaker match overall as a 42. When we actually look through the feedback and the gaps, it's not actually picking up the same level of depth in my experience versus the experience that's required from the job description. So in this one, the quality is lower. The cost is lower as well. Looking at $1,700 for 50,000 applications, but it's actually taking longer to run through. The speed to actually process this resume was for some reason higher, and so we're looking at 14 hours to get through all 50,000. So quality is down, cost is slightly better, but speed is also down. And I think for that reason, I'm going to put Sonnet 4.6 as a C. And it's not really something I'd be wanting to use unless I had no other choice or as a clear backup option. Okay, Haiku 4.5, and again you can see this the rubric is even harsher here. It goes into kind of some things about how no background in organizational development or change management or HR training, despite this is what I've been doing for the last 8 years. It does correctly show that there's mismatch in kind of keyword matching, but we can see here it's not really reasoning. It's actually just looking at kind of like data point to data point and matching based on that, which, as a quick scan of top of funnel, that may be enough for what you're trying to do. But I think in production, this is not something that we want. That's not really a quality that I would want to see. Obviously, the cost is much better. This is less than $600 for 50,000 resumes, and the speed is slightly better as well, less than 8 hours. But even still, not something I'd use in production. Quality is just not really there. I'm going to put that as a C as well. Let's put that over here. All right, now onto OpenAI. So we can see we've got our Anthropic models. We have one really good one, two that are not so good, and really not something I would push to production. 5.5 is the latest OpenAI model. Let's see how that scores. And instantly we can see that the amount of feedback, the amount of data points we've got back, more verbose than what we saw in the Claude model. And anyone that's used ChatGPT probably recognizes this. The other thing is that the rubric is a lot more complementary, I would say. So this is not, in my opinion, really effectively filtering out for everything that we want. I think it makes some good points. It's actually, you can see it's going into depth on the specific areas, and it does pick up most of the gaps that were missing from the job description and the profile, but it's actually much harder to read through this. And for that reason, it's not something I would be happy to use in production. And when we look at the cost and the speed, this is costing somewhat in the same ballpark as Opus 4.8, but it's actually much slower as well. So overall, this is And this is fine if you only have access to OpenAI and you want to use these for actually detailed analysis. But I would probably want to do a lot of tweaking on the rubric in order to make sure it's not being overly friendly to the candidates, and make sure it's explicitly calling out the gaps and being succinct in its feedback. So for that reason, I'm going to put 5.5 as a B. Better than the other Claude models that we saw, but I think there's a big gap between that and Opus 4.8. Next one, 5.4 Mini. Now this is interesting because the score that we actually got out of here is actually much closer to what we got from Opus. And if we look at the rubric, we can see it is actually somewhat similar to what we got from the Opus rubric before. And the other thing I like about this is that the feedback is a little bit more succinct as well. And so we're actually picking up most of what we need from this. It's not going into this kind of like very elaborate detail, and it's giving us a pretty effective summary without being kind of overly optimistic about the candidate's prospects. And so I think this is overall a pretty good model. But what I really like about this is cost and speed. This is the cheapest one we've seen so far, $362, 50,000 resumes in 4.2 hours. So for a high volume production use case, this is definitely something that I would be wanting to consider. And so for that reason, given we got the same score as Opus at a much lower cost, I'm actually going to put this in S tier. Even though I've not been a big fan of OpenAI recently, I do think this outperforms Opus 4.8. Although I would argue that if I was using something for myself, I would still default to Opus 4.8 just because it has a little bit more depth to it. From a purely cost minimization standpoint, I think we're pretty comfortable putting 5.4 Mini at top of the funnel here. All right, so next one, Gemini 3.5 Flash. So here we can see that the actual response here is much lower. Now, when I was playing around with this, I did notice that the API for the Gemini models is kind of a little different. You have to really define the context. So we may not be getting as much detail as we could get out of Gemini. And this was designed to be a very quick setup. So I'm sure that actually going into depth on the Gemini models would create better results. But the feedback is, it's pretty sparse. The rubric is slightly weighted towards the optimistic side. Look at even the resume clarity and ATS friendliness. It used the same formatting style as everything else, but this is scoring us as a 76. Mini is scoring us as a 40, and if we go to Opus 4.8, that's scoring us as a 55. So such a range, and something that should be fairly easy to analyze. And it's not actually picking up as many of the gaps as before. And so for a top of funnel filtering mechanism, we want something that's going to be able to very quickly decide, is this someone we want to move through the pipeline or not? And one of the things I do like about this when compared against GPT 5.5 is it's much cheaper and much faster. And so if we want something that is it's actually going to kind of give us a little bit more depth, maybe we'd want to consider 3.5 Flash, especially if we only have access to the Gemini models. But I still think Mini outperforms for pure volume, and Opus outperforms for actually detail and quality. And finally, Flash Lite. I won't go into too much depth here. It's basically scoring everything as being excellent. It does highlight the gaps, a few of the gaps, but it's missing so much context. It's the cheapest by far, $115 to get through 50,000 of these, and you can do that in under 2 hours. So it's a very lightweight model, very fast, but the quality is just not there. And so for that reason, I'm going to drop this down as a D. And really, that's, I think, how I would score the kind of current batch of models against this kind of one specific use case. So the big reveal, what am I actually going to do with this data? Well, you may have noticed that this is actually sitting in a kind of a development environment as I'm starting to kind of build out this new tool for people on our platform. And so what I'm actually going to do, this is the admin demo. If you click on the user profile, there will be very soon a resume scorer drop down here. So in addition to all of the courseware that we have on the Talent Academy, one feature I'm starting to build out now is support for through career development. And this is a very simple way to actually give people access to tools that they can use to go themselves and get feedback on their prospects against a different job without having to copy and paste every time. What we're actually going to do is push this to production. Hopefully by the time you watch this video, if you go to the Meander Talent Academy, you should be able to, if you're on a free membership, get access to the basic 5.4 Mini, which obviously is low cost and is not a huge issue for us to offer that. But if you are on one of the paid memberships and you're subscribed to us, you will be able to get access to Opus 4.8, which is going to give you a little bit more detail and feedback. And then as people use this and we kind of see what kind of results we're getting, we can actually develop these models further. We'll obviously update them as we get new models come through. But if you're in the job market right now and you're trying to think, how does my resume stack up to a specific job posting, this is potentially a good place to get started. And as I said, we're going to kind of release a lot more in the future. I'm not going to reveal too much, but I'm pretty excited about it. So if you like this kind of approach, you like this kind of format, it's the first time I've done one of these tier lists, please drop a comment below. Please like and subscribe, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.